Hello everyone, I am back from BattleBots and it's time to start making some videos. This video is the long-awaited Long Long MAAAAAN STEAMfest 2019 recap video, complete with gummies. So let's get started and see all the fights that Long Long MAAAAAN had for STEAMfest back in March 2019. STEAMfest is a relatively small competition locally here in Colorado. It's Longmont up in the fairgrounds, same place that AVC is held. And I mention this because since it's a small competition, we decided to do a round robin. There just really weren't that many competitors in the beetleweight class. STEAMfest came about 2 weeks after Motorama ended, so many of us local Colorado people were kind of tired because we went out to Motorama, competed, and I competed with crippling depression, then we come back and 2 weeks later there's another competition, and I built Long Long MAAAAN from scratch those 2 weekends before STEAMfest. So, you know, we're all just kind of tired and we just kind of wanted a nice, easy, relaxing competition. So we just went with a round robin format, and so there really is no brackets to speak of. So I'm just going to kind of go through the fights and you can just kind of calculate the win-loss record from that. That being said, my first fight of the day was up against Tashi. Tashi is a vertical spinner that is relatively front heavy. It has a big weapon on it, but it is pretty heavy up front, so it tends to kind of nosedive a little bit. And it is a relatively new builder. I think he's been to a couple events here, and I actually kind of helped mentor him on his first couple builds. So, you know, it's always cool to see new people show up. And really, in terms of strategy, there is no strategy with Long Long MAAAAN whatsoever. This was a pretty untested design. I just kind of threw it together for fun, as you remember back in the overview video. So really, I just wanted to see what would happen and what it would do. So yeah, let's see the fight.
I've never seen Tashi. I've never seen it in action.
We're going to cut this off and get this time started. We're going to start this in 3, 2, 1. Fight, robot! Let's see if you can get him out of it. Okay, there we go. See if this is what's going to happen. Let's see, can you knock him back over? If not, I'm going to have to start counting. We'll give him one.
Also didn't have enough torque in the motor. Dang, everyone look at that.
No. Center of gravity too low. All right, ready, start counting. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This was my very first time driving Long Long MAAAAN on a metal surface, so first time experiencing the magnetic downforce of this thing, and I can tell you that it is extremely responsive and therefore extremely hard to drive, especially with the really long, narrow profile. So that was kind of an interesting learning experience. As you can see, it is very quick, and I was able to just kind of box rush over to the other side. Tashi fell forward, and that was pretty much the match. However, it became very apparent very quickly that I was going to need to do something about the wheels because they were just way too low to the ground, and I was going to get hung up on everything. But I got a win out of that, and so it was time to move up against my next opponent, which was WAYWARD Antagonist. The second match of the day was up against WAYWARD Antagonist, which is a bot built by Jonathan, who is same guy who does To Be or Not To Be and QB. And so it's a similar design, just more of in a beetleweight format. But that would be interesting because it does sit up a bunch higher, and you know, it's kind of harder for me to push it around. So I was kind of curious to see how that went. So let's see that fight.
All right, they're in the arena, so I don't have to talk about All right, so we have drivers. Are you ready? Crowd, are you ready? All right, let's break something. In 3, 2, 1, fight! Oh, there's no weapon. Oh, look at that. Oh, no, done to you? So Long Long Man actually has a bunch of magnets underneath it that's holding it to the ground. WAYWARD Antagonist is a spatula, and they are stuck. I don't know what's going on. He's skewering like a bat. I don't even know how we're going to judge this.
I think this is going to have to go to audience decision.
How many more minutes?
A minute 45 seconds left. Oh, is it down a wheel? No. Somebody break something. Not the arena. Okay, so he's stuck there. Okay, pin. So we have the refrigerator bar magnet. Oh, we got wedged. Oh, now he's pinned him against the wall. So you're gonna, okay. Oh, you're gonna do this again. Oh, okay. This is how you gotta just pin them. You're like a giant refrigerator magnet. 45 seconds.
Oh,
Oh no. Okay, the arena, okay.
how much time?
You know, enough. Enough. We got 30 seconds.
Okay.
Entertain us.
Trying.
Oh no, are you down a wheel? What is this, windshield wiper? Please, yes. If you can gather up all of the metal dust off the floor, it would be very helpful. Thank you. You know what? I'll give you a point for that. All right, we got 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's it. Wow. I'm very tingly.
Unfortunately, they couldn't get their weapon working in time, so it ended up just kind of being like this wedge or plow, which kind of hurt me in a couple instances because it was magnetic, so it would stick to the bottom magnets a little bit, and we got bound up a couple times. And as you could see, I was getting bound up on the floor. There was just too much of a lip. This thing only sits maybe when it's driving a 1/16 of an inch off the ground because the magnets will kind of squish it down into the ground. So that was a bit of a problem. And when I do get stuck, it is very hard to unstick me because no other robot has that much force to actually get me off of a lip. But thankfully, towards the end of the match, I kind of figured out that I could straddle the wheel and just slam the wheel against the side. But I did end up having some drive issues at the end, which at this point in the competition, I really wasn't sure what that was, because as soon as I took it out of the arena and turned it on in the pits, everything seemed to work out okay. And I'll get into more details on that later. But I ended up getting a win out of this one, so not too bad. So moving on to the third fight of the day. So before we get to the third fight against Rumham, I wanted to talk about the gummies here. So if you watched the overview video for Long Long Man, you probably have seen the Long Long Man commercials, and my wonderful mother-in-law was actually able to import some of these gummies. They were going to come for the actual competition, but it ended up snowing that day, and so they ended up not coming down. But I do have a couple packages of the long gummies and then also the standard gummies. And by the end of this video, I think I am going to break into the long ones. I wish video had smells, because this just smells amazing. And this is probably several months old at this point, because this was back in March. And the packages themselves just have this intensely strong grape smell to them, just that wonderful artificial grape smell. So kind of curious to break into these later. But next up was my fight against Rumham. Of course, Rumham is a really nasty, really devastating bot, and that is kind of the fight that I wanted to have. But unfortunately, going into this match, I didn't have any drive on one side, and I was being an idiot and I just couldn't figure it out. And I'll tell you after this fight what the issue ended up being, but it would work some of the time and then fail other times. So I would test it, it would be perfectly fine. And even before this match, I tested it and everything worked perfectly fine, set it down into the arena and it wasn't working. Thankfully, sort of, Rumham also didn't have drive on one side, but that's a little bit less of a problem for them because they have a big weapon. They can kind of crab walk across the arena. If you're using big magnets, you can't really crab walk because you'll be just stuck in one spot. So let's see how this really terrible fight went.
All right, 3, 2, 1, fight! And we run in front up. Long man is a windshield wiper. Let's see if long man will fire. Let's run! Oh my God! Well, 5, 4, 3. He wants to wreck the paint job. He polished the robot so well. Yeah, unnecessary roughness, 10 yards. Okay, that was good.
Don't open it yet, wait till it's down.
Your winner.
Yeah, so that happened. I really wasn't expecting much with 2 drives down and obviously that big weapon. I couldn't really get into any good position. It was a perfect hit. They clipped just the side of the wheel, which just made that explode off. It actually sheared the shaft right at the brass bushing. So I have the 3D printed piece that holds the whole motor gearbox, and then I have a little brass bushing that the shaft goes through to kind of support it, and it literally sheared right at that corner, which was pretty interesting. And then the second hit took off this front panel. This is a piece of 50 thou titanium, and that was stuck to the front of it. And this is VXB, which is a very high bond. This stuff is very, very difficult to get off. I mean, you basically have to use a crowbar to pry this stuff off once it's put on. So it's kind of interesting to see it just pull off all in one piece. And some of the tape was stuck to one side, some of the tape was stuck to the other side. And there's this nice little bend here in the corner, which titanium of this thickness is very hard to just bend in one little corner. So that was pretty cool to see. And the little piece there towards the very end was one of the wheel covers, one of the little aluminum wheel covers that was on the outside. So yeah, Rumham did a number on Long Long Man. So let's figure out what happened to the drive. So in this video, I'm going to kind of combine the fight recap and the damage recap because really there's not that much to Long Long Man and there really wasn't that much damage to be had. So here is one of the motors, and let's get a closer look at this and I'll show you exactly what failed and why my drive was having issues. So here is the motor removed from the gearbox. And if you look really closely at the pinion, you can see that from here forward, it really doesn't have any teeth, and all the teeth are fine from here back. What had happened is this is where it was engaged with the planetary gears. So from here forward, it was just basically shearing off, and it's nice and smooth. It just took all the teeth right off, and these weren't engaged. So what I'm going to do next time is push this whole shaft further out so I get a nice perfect engagement. It was really just engaging on the very ends of those teeth, or this whole thing got pushed back, something like that. And so I ended up just rounding it off and taking all those teeth off, and that is what caused the intermittent drive. So what was happening is it was maybe just grabbing onto the edge of these teeth, allowing it to drive, but then when I put it into the arena, it was just taking those off. So it was kind of intermittent here and there. So next time, this whole thing needs to come forward a little bit. Now, the reason that this happened is because the amount of downforce I had. So let's go test that. So for testing the downforce, I'm not going to do anything fancy here. I've just got some really strong Gorilla duct tape. on one of these. I think there's a pipe clamp, and then I have my little, it's like a luggage scale basically, but these are nice for measuring loads. So we're just going to turn this on, zero it out, hook this on, and pull up. Okay, so that was about 18 pounds. So let's just try this one more time. Yeah, 18 and a half. So the downforce of this pulling down to the table is about 18 pounds. Now, if I didn't have these magnets on here or flipped it upside down, actually, let's try that. If I flip this upside down, it should only be about 3 pounds because that is just the weight of the bot itself. So what's happening with those gearboxes is think about taking an 18-pound bot, like, what is it, a hobby weight or something like that, and driving that around with these little tiny motors. The effective weight that this is seeing, or the motors are seeing, is about 18 pounds, and so you're really just overworking those motors. So if I ever end up doing a revision of Long Long Man, I'm going to have to do much larger motors and much larger gearboxes. So okay, so if I zero this out, this should be just about 3 pounds or so. Yep, 2.5, somewhere around there. It doesn't have the titanium on there, so 2.5 is about what it should be. So there you go. That is how much downforce Long Long Man has. All right, back to the fights. So the fourth fight that I had for the day was against WUMBO. WUMBO is a, kind of looks like a huge, it has large wheels. It kind of has an overhead weapon that spins on the underneath side of it. And this was going to be interesting. WUMBO has done relatively well at competitions, but its weapon hits kind of high, so I was kind of curious to see how it would end up hitting because it was on the top. At this point, I kind of sort of had some of the drive issues figured out, or at least I knew what was going wrong, and so I took those pinions, flipped them around so that the unused side was now on the inside, so I had to get at least a little bit more life out of them. But at this point, I did have a working drive again, so let's see how that fight went.
You have this nice shiny surface to hold up. All right, drivers, you ready? They look ready. What if I just started without telling them? All right, we're gonna count this down in 3, 2, 1, fight! Oh! Wow, look at that, just shaving the corners right off of it. Oh, that was something.
It's fire!
That's not good. Oh no, is he tight centered on himself? The WUMBO is just, this is not good.
Kiddo can fire that. Is it?
When metal hits metal, sometimes sparks
What is
fly.
happening?
That means fire.
This is just a robot fighting a bar of metal at this point. So,
Just gonna lie back and take it?
see if, I mean, let's see. We got something. Are we gonna take a, he's gonna take a wheel off. Yeah, he's not helping.
Park your name in
We're gonna, yeah, park your name. All right, 5. Okay, he tapped. I didn't have to count. Your winner is WUMBO.
So unfortunately, at this point in the competition, the gearboxes and the motors were just on their last leg. They just didn't have that much left in them. Trying to move around an effective 18-pound bot with these tiny, tiny little motors just didn't work out, and I ultimately got hung up on the seam in the middle of the floor, and WUMBO was unable to move me. The really interesting thing about WUMBO is they were never really able to get down far enough to actually do any damage. They were just kind of scraping against the top, and I was really hoping that this would get a lot more beat up. I know that sounds weird, but I was really hoping that this would just get beat up because this is a a solid block of aluminum. I was hoping to see some good hits, but everyone was just kind of glancing off the top of it. So unfortunately I didn't get any big solid hits against the frame in that match, but I did end up losing just once again because of the magnets, the downforce, and getting stuck on the arena. So next up is the fifth and final fight for Long Long Man. The fifth fight of the day was against a bot called McWedgie. Not surprisingly, it was a big wedge. It was a wedge with a beater bar up at the top, which is kind of an interesting design. The idea was that someone would ramp up the wedge and then get hit by the beater bar up top, and it did happen a couple times during the competition, so that was pretty interesting. I knew that was not going to happen with Long Long Man because there was no way this was going to be able to drive up there, so this was going to be an interesting fight, I guess. Yeah, I was crossing my fingers to hope that I could get at least some drive out of it and wouldn't just destroy the drive completely. So let's see how that went.
It's very interesting. See if Long Man will run up the wedge. Oh, he's already stuck. Oh no, don't get high center. You just lost? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Have your way with it.
Sorry, they can't push 40 pounds of robots.
Try again. Oh no, are you the worst? Are you kidding me? Okay, he's moving again. He has to keep the vibrations going and keep it moving. Alright, if this isn't going to do anything, I'm going to start counting. I'll give it one more hit. Alright, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. McWedgie's your winner as it loses a wheel.
Of course, hopes are not always reality, and my drive died again. I got hung up in the middle of the arena, and that was it for Long Long Man. So overall, it was more fun to build than it was to fight. I really did enjoy making this. It was really fun just sitting there with polish and polishing this thing up to a nice, beautiful mirror finish. And it really was fun to design and make, but in terms of a serious competitor, of course, it is not that. I did consider making a few tweaks and, modifying the drive and modifying the gearboxes because there's a ton of extra weight in the actual extrusion and the aluminum itself. But ultimately, it's just a difficult bot to have in the beetleweight competition. There really isn't a good step up in the gearbox until you go to something significantly heavier. I did look, I did check, I kind of ran the numbers, and it's a difficult balance to get the right amount of drive and also the right amount of beef in the frame that's going to be able to take hits. And of course, you're always going to end up with these wheels at the outside. They're going to be exposed, so those are always going to be vulnerable, and as soon as you lose one, you're dead, you're out. So it is an interesting design, and I did have a lot of fun with it, and I didn't have any video of this, but the protector, for every bot you're supposed to have kind of like a weapon protector. This obviously doesn't have a weapon, but some kind of clamp or something like that to stop people from getting hurt by the weapon. And for this, I decided to just take a long tube sock and set it inside, so that was fun. It was a good bot, it's a fun bot, but this is being retired. It just isn't competitive enough, and it's just completely trashing the gearboxes every time. So everyone, that is all I have for Long Long Man and all of its fights at STEAMfest 2019. Unfortunately, it really wasn't that competitive a bot, but I knew that going into it. I think I built this over the course of 2, maybe 3 days, spanning over 2 weekends, so I really didn't have high expectations. It was more a fun to build kind of thing. Be sure to be on the lookout on my Facebook page and also on YouTube for new updates to my channel. I am going to start a beetleweight build from scratch and do a lot of really short videos along the way to kind of give you an idea of more of my design process, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But right now, I'm going to crack into these gummies and see what they're all about. So, as always, thanks for watching and see you next time. Oh my, that is strong. It tastes like a whole lot of chemicals.
Long, long,
Are you actually still watching this? You're just sitting there on YouTube watching me eat a Japanese gummy. You should maybe do something else. There are a lot of other really good videos online. Go check those out. Still here? This really isn't that good. I'm gonna stop eating it. I'm gonna do something else. You should too.